Lately, I've noticed something interesting. 90s rock music is exploding again with younger listeners. Bands like Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden are everywhere. But at the same time, there's a lot of incredible 90s bands that are being overlooked by this younger audience. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Aaron and I run a vintage booth in an antique mall. And I also sell vinyl records and CDs at record shows where bands like Pearl Jam and Smashing Pumpkins sell very quickly. But whenever I recommend or stock lesser known 90s bands, a lot of the customers just aren't familiar with them and the music goes unsold, which is a shame. So today I want to shine a light on some 90s bands that deserve just as much love as the heavy hitters like Nirvana and Alice in Chains. If you're like me and grew up in the 90s, this will be a fun trip down memory lane. And if you're just discovering this era, hopefully after watching this video, you'll find some great new music and bands to check out. Let's get started now. The most important thing to keep in mind while I'm going through this list is when I'm saying forgotten bands, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're completely forgotten or even unheard of. A lot of these bands will be popular to people that grew up in the 90s. But I want to highlight them because I think people that are just now getting into bands from the 90s and are starting at bands like Nirvana, Alice in Chains, and those just haven't quite reached this level of music. And I think it's important before they just leave the genre altogether and maybe start going into 2000s era rock, I think there's still so much great music for them to explore in the 90s, and that's what I want to highlight today. Now, at shows, a lot of people often ask me, do you have any White Zombie? I always bring this copy, which is the OG version. It's actually a glow-in-the-dark vinyl press from, I think 1996 is when this album came out. Now, this is an expensive record. I think it's about $200, so a lot of them are passing on this, but they'll oftentimes buy White Zombie CDs and things from me. But if I don't have any, I will often recommend that they check out the Melvins instead. A great band from the 80s and 90s. Now, this album was released in 1993. They're a great trio. This is like sludge meets metal meets grunge. And honestly, I don't think a band like White Zombie would exist without a band like the Melvins. And even if you like something a little bit more common like Soundgarden, I still think it's worth checking out a band like the Melvins. And oftentimes when I have this in stock, people just don't buy it. And I think that's a shame because these are great albums. I mean, Kurt Cobain from Nirvana was a massive Melvins fan. This album came out on Atlantic. He helped him get signed to Atlantic and was supposed to produce this album, but, you know, had some life things going on and it just didn't quite fall into place like it was supposed to. But if you are a fan of bands like White Zombie or Soundgarden, maybe even a band like Danzig, please check out the Melvins. I promise you'll absolutely love their sound. Another great band from the 90s that I've actually fallen back in love with and have spent a lot of time going back through their catalog recently is the Meat Puppets. Now, this was their big album, right? This was the one with the radio single with Backwater. And to be honest with you, I think this album Backwater was a little overplayed. It might still even be overplayed. And I think that a lot of people just get stuck with this album and they forget about how much great music the Meat Puppets made. Now, they started out really early on making punk records for labels like SST. And then they kind of just started going off on their own direction and making music that honestly kind of has like a desert rock ZZ Top vibe to it. I mean, this is a great album. Up on the Sun. This is actually on SST. This is where they kind of start, venturing into sounds that are a little bit more laid back. The thing I love about this band is their guitar work and the way their vocals blend together with the brothers in the band, just sort of having that natural sound singing together. The reason why I love recommending the Meat Puppets is because so many folks at shows come up to me and they're interested in buying Nirvana's Unplugged, which point I tell them, if you like Lake of Fire and Plateau on this album, those are actually Meat Puppet songs from this album. And the guys from Meat Puppets actually get up on stage and perform the songs with Nirvana and Kurt at that legendary performance. So please, whatever you do, check out the Meat Puppets. They have so many different styles. Don't start at their first album. Start somewhere in the middle. To be honest with you, I think Up on the Sun is a great place to start. But even if you think that Too High to Die and Backwater is a bit overplayed, there's still great songs on here like Flaming Heart. So much great stuff on here. So don't overlook the Meat Puppets, especially if you are a fan of Nirvana's Unplugged. Now, as you can imagine, I sell a lot of Nirvana albums whenever I'm at shows and in my antique booth. And it makes total sense why I would. But whenever people are buying Nirvana albums, especially Incesticide and Bleach, I always ask them, how familiar are you with a band called Mudhoney? Because to me, the songs on Bleach and Incesticide especially have a much different, a more raw energy for Nirvana than the more, just studio polished sound of Nevermind. And I think when you're listening to Incesticide and Bleach, it sounds a lot like Mudhoney. And I just absolutely love this band. This is a cassette copy that I have. It's actually a reissue, and it's on it's got an orange shell here, so that's kind of fun. I'm always on the hunt when I am at record shows to buy a copy of this on vinyl, but I really love the first press because it comes with a poster. This is Super Fuzz Big Muff, an EP that they released, and this has probably one of their most well-known songs, Touch Me, I'm Sick, on here. Now, I actually discovered the band Mudhoney through the single soundtrack when I was a kid, because they've got a great song on here called Overblown, which I think is probably making fun of how overblown the grunge Seattle scene was becoming at the time, which is kind of ironic to have that on the soundtrack to a movie that's trying to popularize that same scene. But that's what you gotta love about Mudhoney. But this is just sort of rough in your face. None of these recordings are super polished. All the songs are very catchy. It leans a little more on the punk side, which is why I think it's more applicable to Nirvana's works like Incesticide and Bleach. But if you haven't heard Mudhoney, please check them out. Now, as I'm going through this list, if you have any bands that you think are overlooked, let me know in the comments below. I have so many ideas for this video. I had to just start narrowing it down. Honestly, I was pulling records to show in this video, and I was passing up bands, and I was like, oh, I should have put that in today's video. So I don't know, let me know if you like this type of video and if you'd like for me to do more, because I'd happy to do another round of great bands from that era that we could highlight and talk about. Now, Pearl Jam is a band that sells pretty quickly for me at shows. Obviously, 10 and Versus, Vitology, those are the ones that sell probably the best. But this is No Code, one of their classic early albums. And on this album, they have a song called Habit. Now, in that song, Eddie Vedder sings a lyric speaking as a child of the 90s. And that is a direct sort of throwback to when he sang on this album, which is Ball Hog or Tugboat by the legendary bassist Mike Watt. Now, Eddie Vedder appears on this album, and he sings a song called Against the 70s, where there's a great line where Mike Watt says, speaking as a child of the 70s. Now, if you're not familiar with Mike Watt was the legendary bassist in the band The Minutemen, who spent most of their time making their albums in the 80s. Legendary punk band. Unfortunately, when D. Boone, a member of the band, passed away, Mike Watt went on and formed a band called Firehose. And that band was sort of a late 80s, early 90s band. And in 1995, he released this album. And basically, what this is he called everyone he knew in the scene. And this has so many artists from sort of the grunge alternative era performing all different songs on this. Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters plays on this. I already said Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam. Oh, look, Chris and Kurt Kirkwood from the Meat Puppets. Mark Lanigan from Screaming Trees. Adam Horovitz from Beastie Boys. Kathleen Hanna from Bikini Kill, Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Jay Mascis from Dinosaur Jr. It goes on and on and on. And they all play different songs with Mike Watt playing bass and performing throughout this whole thing. I love the packaging on this. This is like old school CD stuff right here, right? Like with all the different opening and closing things here. I actually have a copy of this also on cassette, but for some reason I never bought it on LP, which I should keep my eye out for. But Mike Watt is just such a legendary feature artist within this genre that it's, I don't know, it's slightly criminal to overlook him. And I think even when people think about him in Minutemen or Firehose, they still forget just how great of an album this is and how many awesome people showed up to perform with him on this record. This tour came to Nashville right before I went to college and I missed it. I think Eddie Vedder and Dave Grohl, I think a lot of people showed up to play in Nashville on this tour, and I'm so bummed that I missed it. But I'm so happy to have this album, and if you've never listened to it, look it up online. It's such a fun thing to listen to, especially for all of us who love all these great 90s bands. We can't forget about great female rock bands in this video, and one that I think is often overlooked when people are talking about bands like Hole or Breeders or even Veruca Salt, bands like that. The one that no one ever mentions is the Juliana Hatfield 3. This is an album that I absolutely love. I fell in love with this band the minute I heard the song My Sister. Now, Juliana Hatfield was in the Blake Babies. She also did some time, probably felt like doing time, when she was in the Lemonheads. And she released this album in 1993. Now, this is probably there's some other great sort of female-oriented bands of that era. Think Throwing Muses, Belly, but this one to me has just enough of a little 90s rock grunge to it, with also just a perfect sort of alternative vibe just in general all over the place. But these songs are so catchy. Again, you've got Supermodel, My Sister, Spin the Bottle was another great song on this. If you are a fan of female-fronted rock bands, you have got to check this out. And I mean, Juliana's still making great music today, and she has so many awesome solo albums as well. But there was just something about this album when it came out as more of a band effort that just really hit home for me. I listened through it from beginning to end. I never skip a song. If you love female-oriented rock, definitely check out the Juliana Hatfield 3. Now, a lot of you are probably confused as to why I'm showing so many different formats here, but at the end of the day, I don't really think one format is better than the other. I think it should be about the music, not the format. So I'm showing tapes, CDs, vinyl. I'm showing it all. So I hope that is as fun for you as it is for me, because a lot of this I've just had for years on the format that I bought it on. So I figured I would just show that. A great band. Great band that is not talked about enough is Screaming Trees. This is their album Uncle Anesthesia. This is a pretty early record. I think if anyone knows this band, they're probably more familiar with Sweet Oblivion, which again is another album that I'm always on the lookout to pick up a vinyl copy, but I would love a first press for just some reason. And I've yet to find one, so I don't have it on vinyl yet. But Screaming Trees are such a great band. If you're a fan of, I don't know, let's say Alice in Chains, and you love that the vocals and the guitars and all of that, Screaming Trees, Mark Lanegan, the lead singer, has that perfect like grungy Tom Waits fronting a rock band sound to his voice. And unfortunately, he passed away not too long ago, which is sad because Mark Lanegan also had a lot of great solo albums. And Screaming Trees, to me, the way that I found them, again, was on the single soundtrack where they have the classic song, Nearly Lost You. And I think because that song is so classic on this soundtrack, their full albums are kind of lost to time and people don't pick them up like they should. But if you love bands like Alice in Chains and you just love great guitar rock and wonderful gritty vocal stylings and catchy songs, you gotta check out Screaming Trees. Well, let's move a little bit out of the Northeast and Seattle and stop talking so much about grunge bands and let's focus a little bit more on just general 90s rock bands. This one specifically coming from California. Now, this is one of my favorite rock bands of all time. People just call them stoner rock, but I don't know. It is what it is. If you love guitars, you have to love Fu Manchu. This album is called The Action Is Go. This is probably one of their most popular ones from 1997. I have so much of their music. I absolutely adore this EP, which is Godzilla's Eaten Dust. It's just, how do I explain this band? Imagine a rock band singing about cars and surfing and the beach, but in the most heavy, riffy way possible, but still super catchy, fun in your face. If you are on a long drive and you need to get like 1 more hour and you're super tired, put on Fu Manchu. I guarantee you will get there. Now, the reason why I recommend these guys a lot is because a lot of people are still buying Queens of the Stone Age albums from me. And whenever they're interested in Queens of the Stone Age, I always mention, like, hey, you should check out Fu Manchu as well. Because if you like Queens of the Stone Age, I think you'll absolutely love this band. My wife and I saw them in the 90s, and I swear, or maybe it was like early 2000s actually, we saw them at a small club in Nashville called Exit N. They absolutely tore it up. It's some of the most impressive guitar playing I've ever seen. The solos are awesome. It's loud, it's heavy, but it's catchy at the same time. Don't overlook Fu Manchu. This next one might be a little controversial because this band is actually really well known, but this is an album that I think is overlooked that they released in the 1990s. That band is Faith No More, and the album is Angel Dust. Now, everyone is familiar with Faith No More because of The Real Thing with their hit song Epic, and even earlier albums before that. But they seem to have sort of stumbled into this rock opera, heavy, it's not metal, but it's just heavy alternative rock album called Angel Dust that I can't imagine what it was like when they turned this into the label and they listened to it and was like, what is this? Because it didn't even sell that well at the time, which is perhaps why it's so overlooked. But when a lot of younger people are coming up and they're buying albums from bands like Korn, or they're interested in Epic, from Faith No More because they're familiar with The Real Thing because of Epic, I have to tell them, listen, you got to check out Angel Dust. It's going to take a few listens to get through. It is all over the place musically. This album really showcases the vocal range of Mike Patton. You've got all these strange songs and strange lyrics. I don't even know if there is a theme with this album, but if it is, it would just be odd and strange. But I absolutely love it. Songs like Be Aggressive and RV, Midlife Crisis, which I might be going through one now. It resonated back when I first heard this album as a teenager, and it still resonates to me now. One of my favorite days ever was when my son, who is in his 20s, texted me and asked me if I had ever heard of a band called Hum. And I was like, are you kidding me? I absolutely love this band. He had heard the song Stars. He stumbled on it some way, either on TikTok or via streaming or something along those lines. And he was like, oh, they've got this cool song called Stars. And I'm like, they have a cool everything. They're one of the best bands from the 1990s. A lot of people are familiar with You'd Prefer an Astronaut, this album. And I actually sell this pretty well when I bring CD copies to shows. But it's worth mentioning that you've got to also check out their great album, Downward is Heavenward. This band was from the Illinois area. They don't have a lot of albums underneath their belt, but it doesn't matter because the ones they've made have been almost so perfect that they don't need a lot of albums. This is sort of heavy, atmospheric, I call it space rock. I imagine like if I'm watching like 2001 A Space Odyssey when they're sort of traveling through space and they're showing all those great scenes, this music is the soundtrack that should be playing. Again, I saw these guys in 96 or 97 at the same small club that I mentioned for Fu Manchu, a small club called Exit N. One of the loudest shows I've ever been to. My ears, I think, rang for a day afterwards. but I absolutely love this band. They just put out an album a couple years ago, maybe it was during the pandemic or right after, called Inlet, which is another great album to check out. If you've never heard Hum and you like really atmospheric rock, you definitely got to check this band out. A lot of people from the 90s are going to remember this band, but I think that they've really flown under the radar for a newer audience, and that is the Afghan Wigs with their classic album Gentlemen, which in my opinion, this is probably one of the most legendary album covers of all time. This is a recent reissue copy that I picked up on yellow vinyl. Again, I'd love to find an OG copy of it, and I'll keep my eyes peeled, but for now, this works. Afghan Wigs are actually from Cincinnati, Ohio, and this is definitely more on the emotional side of rock music. It's not that it's emo, but the themes and the lyrics and the singing definitely have that sort of tortured emo feel to it, all with a great rock band behind it. Somebody once said that this was sort of like if the Replacements made a grunge record, and I don't disagree with that in a way, and I think it's mostly because of the vocals and the way they sound on this album. But if you've never heard Gentlemen by the Afghan Wigs, and if you're someone that's just feeling a little despondent, or maybe you're just a little bummed about maybe a current relationship or the job you're in, or you're just kind of sad and want to listen to an album that meets you there in that same spot, definitely check out this record. Now, the great thing about these albums, a lot of these, is some of them can still be found for a great price because they're not like the super rare first pressing of Nirvana's Nevermind or Alice in Chains' Dirt. You know, some of these albums that are selling for hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. So that's what makes it fun to shop for some of these lower tiered 90s bands. Now, I also love shopping dollar bins for cheap vinyl because that's another great way for me to discover new music. If you'd be interested in learning more about how I shop the dollar bins and how to find great music that way on a budget, you can do so by watching this video here.